Welcome to Myths, Monsters, and Murders.
I'm Chandi Keppel.
And I'm Phyllis York.
We're just two Lebanon locals that came together and bonded over our love of all things creepy and mysterious. We are here to bring you the stories of Missouri's myths, cryptids, crimes, and murders with an emphasis on keeping it local. Today's stories are not for the faint of heart. Descriptions may be graphic, so listener discretion is advised. So first, we'd like to take this opportunity to introduce ourselves to our listeners. My name is Chandi Keppel. I am a 31-year-old small business owner, aspiring teacher. I am a mom, a wife, and a true crime lover. So Phyllis, I want you to take this chance to introduce yourself to our listeners, as well as give us a little bit of Lebanon local history.
My name is Phyllis York. I'm an author, wife, and mother and grandmother. I'm 50 years old. I was born and raised in Lebanon, Missouri. I've been here for the majority of my 50 years. I love true crime. I got obsessed with it when I was a kid, and that obsession never waned. The town that we live in, Lebanon, Missouri, is a strange one. It has made the news many times, local, national, international. Lebanon is known as the odometer rollback capital of the world. And for a while, we were the chop shop. Ooh, that's a hard word to say.
Very much.
Chop shop capital of the nation. And a lot of weird things happen here for it being such a small town. We've had serial killers born and bred here that have went cross country on killing sprees. I started calling Lebanon the Hellmouth back in 2012, 2013, when a giant hole was found beneath St. Bernard's Market when they were tearing it down, and no one knew what it was or why it was there. And I said, oh, that's it, all the strange stuff that's happened around here, welcome to the Hellmouth. And it stuck. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit about Lebanon.
Are you looking for unique shirts with custom designs? Something that helps you stand out as one of a kind? If that's the case, please check us out at 88thandaugust.com for all your shirt needs.
Chandi, what is the first true crime case that really got you interested in true crime?
The first case that ever piqued my interest in true crime was a case that was actually local to my hometown. So I am not a Lebanon native. I am a transplant from a town called Gainesville. It's really, really small. Everybody knows everybody's business, and there are more cows than people there. But in my hometown, in the year 2000, when I was about 10 years old, there was a man named Winrod that was actually charged with abducting 6 of his many grandchildren from North Dakota. Over the span of a year, he had actually traveled to North Dakota with some of his children and ended up kidnapping 6 kids, all ranged from the ages of 9 years old to 16 years old, and crossed state lines with them and brought them back to this kind of compound that was on the outskirts of my hometown. My mom drove a bus for a local school district, and her bus route just happened to go by this compound that Gordon Winrod had created. He had started his own church called Our Savior's Church. He actually came from Kansas to start his own church. They had very anti-Semitic views. They were very racist. They were just all around really terrible people. And so everyone just kind of stayed away from them. In 2000, there was actually a 4-day standoff between these grandchildren, and I believe it was state troopers or the local sheriff's department, one or the other. I can't exactly remember that. These kids were indoctrinated to believe that, police were bad and The only people that were good were the people involved in this church, the Our Savior's Church. They witnessed their grandpa, Gordon Winrod, and 2 other individuals, I believe it was his son and his daughter, be arrested as they were going down their road to check the mail for that day. And because they were trained to believe that police were bad, the kids immediately went down into this basement, and it's described as just a concrete block basement with a single plastic PVC pipe piping in oxygen to the basement. And so keep in mind, very, very tiny, creepy farmhouse, very, very tiny cinder block basement with a single PVC pipe for oxygen, and 6 grandkids, all from 9 years old to 16 years old. During this time, the children boarded themselves up in this basement and actually had weapons. I believe there was a gun that the children were trained to use, and they refused to come out. And so eventually what they ended up doing was letting Gordon Winrod be transported in from where he was being held, and they unhandcuffed him and sent him into the basement to go talk to his grandkids. And eventually he talked to them and convinced them to come out of the basement, and I don't want to say turn themselves in because they were kids, they were victims, but they ended up turning themselves over to the police, and the standoff ended. Eventually, Gordon Winrod was convicted of, I believe, 6 counts of child abduction and received a 30-year sentence. In 2017, though, he had just served 10 years of that sentence and was actually released from prison. And it was reported that he purchased an abandoned school building in North Dakota. Nobody made the connection who Gordon Winrod was because all this happened in Missouri. It didn't happen in North Dakota. And so he actually has, I believe, a granddaughter who lives in the area of North Dakota where he bought this abandoned school building, and she has gone around warning people that he is going to start his, quote unquote cult back up again, and there's going to be bad things that happen in North Dakota where he's at. Unfortunately, even though I did a lot of Googling and trying to find him, I know he's still alive because there was never an obituary or anything published on him, but there is not any other information regarding Gordon Winrod. And this isn't necessarily the same type of true crime that most people get interested in. It's not a murder. It's not a serial killer. It's not a Bundy, a Gein, or a BTK, but it's still one that really piqued my interest because even though I like the gore and the scary and the creepy, I'm very much into the psychological and cults and, how do these people who are truly terrible people convince good people to join them and to share these outrageous and just, out there theories. So,
QAnon.
Yes, maybe someday we'll cover that because let's be honest, we live in the Bible Belt in southern Missouri, so yes. They run rampant here.
My Mother Road by Phyllis York. Some journeys only happen once in 2 lifetimes. For her 17th birthday, Matilda Banks receives letters written by her mother, who disappeared when she was an infant, and sets off to follow her along Route 66. Will she be able to solve the mystery surrounding her mother's disappearance, or lose herself along the way? Available in paperback, ebook, and audiobook at phyllisyork.com, Amazon, and wherever you order your books.
So Phyllis, tell me, I know you have a lot of, I don't want to say contact, what word am I looking for? You have a lot of information, connections. Yes, connections is the right word. You have a lot of connections to a lot of crimes that have actually happened in Lebanon. You've had some that have personally affected you. You have a lot that you remember just from your husband's previous line of work. And so tell us more about what got you into true crime, because yours is definitely more interesting than mine, I feel like.
The first crime that I really remember was the Atlanta child killer, Wayne Williams, who may not even be Wayne Williams. They just reopened this case. The new mayor just sent off DNA from the victims to verify if Wayne Williams was actually the killer. So very interesting. But I digress. So my father was a predator, and for a brief time we lived in St. Petersburg, Florida, while my parents were trying to find themselves. And my father would use all the warnings on the news about victims not even 500 miles away of this serial killer to get all the students that went to Norwood Elementary that lived in our neighborhood to come to our house instead of going home, because most of us were latchkey kids. I only wasn't at the time because my father got fired from many, many jobs. He got fired from, I think he was working for Winnebago at that time, and he had been fired and was holding court in our garage with neighborhood children as often as he could. The first criminal case that really affected me was the John David Brown case, which happened right outside of Lebanon in Lakeway. In 1985, he had escaped from the police after killing Claude Long and led the highway patrol and sheriff's departments on what at the time was the largest manhunt in Missouri history, because he had been seen in the Mark Twain forest, and at that time we'd been sent to live with my grandparents because the home we were living in couldn't keep my brother and I. So every time we would leave my grandparents' house, the police would stop us and go through the car, check the trunk, make sure there's nothing hiding in the back seat to make sure John David Brown wasn't hiding out in our car. The farmers in the area had kind of made up this weird legendary status for him because they were all about, Second Amendment, don't touch our guns, and he had been a very vocal proponent of keep the government out of your gun case. And so a lot of the farmers, my grandfather included, were putting food out on their back decks, leaving supplies out there in case, this dude was out anywhere in our areas. As it turned out, he was. Because after he was finally arrested, almost 20 years later, a policewoman began re-investigating the old case and contacted John David Brown and began a rapport with him and was able to get him to tell her where to look for the body of the woman that he had kidnapped. So Mary Ellen Noble's body was found dismembered and buried not even 100 yards from my grandmother's front door. When I look back on it, it gives me the chills because this was so close. And I was only 13 at that time, so I was already I guess I was 14. I was terrified of everything that I didn't understand. So yeah, that's the first local crime that really touched my life. Like she said, there are a lot of connections that we'll be able to make in this series. Like one of my friends you might know by the name of Gypsy Rose used to go to conventions with Gypsy and her mom Dee Dee. My uncle, Joe Bill.
That is quite the name,
Yeah.
Joe Bill.
Joe Bill Burrow was murdered here at the Bell Motel in 1991.
Oh God, I just laughed.
Yeah, it's all right. You didn't know, but I will hold it against you.
Okay, I don't blame you.
But he was killed here in a hotel room in 1991 that over 20 years later would end up being the same room that another friend of ours, his biological son, Jonathan Bodonk, would end up dying in. His mother and her boyfriend were brought up on charges for that death, but they ended up not actually trying them. So he just died, and it was a very horrible way that it happened, and we'll cover it on a later episode. But there's a lot of these, and a lot of serial killers that we have weird connections to. So this is going to be an awesome series, and I can't wait for you to be here with us.
agreed. And the plan is to try to keep it as, friendly as possible. However, throughout our discussions regarding some of the cases that we have listed, descriptions are going to be graphic. There may be conversations regarding violence, both physical, sexual, what have you. And so just ask that our audience is aware of that, because I know I'm guilty as a podcast listener myself of playing things in my car with my young children and then not realizing that they're listening to something that's about a murder. Yes. So it'll be as PG-13 as we can keep it. However, some descriptions are graphic and unavoidable, depending on what case we're covering that day. So we always will try to list a warning beforehand.
So we can't wait for you to join us on the next episode of Myths, Monsters, and Murder.
Thanks for joining us.
Bye. Myths, Monsters, and Murders, hosted by Phyllis York and Chandi Keppel, produced by Ken York. Tune in next time.